Today we're talking about healthy relationships. We're going to start with the elements of what a healthy relationship looks like. And just to be clear, when we're talking about relationships this time, we're not just talking about romantic relationships, but also relationships with your friends, with your family, and the people around you. And so let's begin with the elements of a healthy relationship. You are free to be yourself. There is mutual respect. There is limited jealousy. There is support. There's a healthy respect for privacy. Setting boundaries, trust, and honesty is critical. Basically, in a healthy relationship, both parties feel comfortable being authentic, meaning being themselves, without feeling like they're being put down or being forced to change important identities and important parts of who they are. There's also not a feeling of shame or being made to feel bad if the person decides to spend time with other people and really expand their social network. And I see that happen oftentimes in friend groups, where there's this assumption that you're supposed to be hanging with one group of people, and if you decide to spend some time or go to a movie with somebody else or some other people, then that group kind of starts shaming you or shunning you because you should be spending all their time with them. That's not healthy. That's a toxic relationship. You should be allowed to use your time as you see fit. Additionally, in healthy relationships, you have a sense of support and you provide support as well. Meaning, if you feel like you're going through something, that other party is available to you to listen to you and to provide guidance and encouragement as needed. Also, your privacy and setting boundaries is an element of are elements of healthy relationships, meaning you should not have to share passwords, text history, things of that nature. Well, that really implies a lack of trust. And if there's no trust in the relationship, then there needs to be a reevaluation whether that relationship is one that should continue. Or if there's work that needs to be done to reestablish a relationship. But in any case, you should not have to disclose private information in order to stay in a relationship with someone. Furthermore, setting boundaries. There are things that are important to you, physically, emotionally, time-wise. All those things could be, there are parts of those things that are important to you. You should be able to have boundaries set with that, as far as how you want to spend your time, what are the things that you want to share. And the other party should be respecting that. And furthermore, trust and honesty is critical, which kind of goes back to what I said. If you're in a relationship where you cannot communicate openly with somebody without there being a fear that maybe there'll be some negative consequences, then maybe you need to evaluate whether that relationship is healthy. And all of these elements go both ways. Not only should you expect them from the other party, but that party should be receiving that from you as well. Next, we're going to look at how do you end a bad relationship. Please take a few minutes to look at this video.
Any true relationship between friends or significant others should be one between equals. You give and take equally. One person's needs aren't met over another's. Friends and partners are supposed to give you energy, lift you up when you're down, and want the best for you. But sometimes we get into relationships that drain energy from us. These are toxic relationships, and they can negatively affect all aspects of our lives. On this week's Wellcast, we're going to show you how you can tell if you're even in a toxic relationship, and then we're going to help you extricate yourself from that unhealthy situation pronto. Selfie 1. Diagnose the relationship. How do you know if a friend or partner is bringing you down? Well, in much the same way that you know that you're coming down with a cold. Toxic relationships come with symptoms. When you're around this person, how do you feel? Here are a few other questions you should ask yourself if you're thinking you might be in a toxic situation. Does my friend put me down all the time? Are they jealous when I spend time with others? Do they constantly bring up parts of me that they want to change? Do they take more than they give? Am I only doing the things that they want to do? Selfie 2. Recognize your role in the relationship. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, Nobody can make you feel inferior without your consent. All right, look, we know we got that from Princess Diaries, obviously. Moving on. Listen, you have autonomy in every relationship in your life. If your friend or partner is stealing your sunshine, you need to figure out what you're doing to allow them to do this. Are you being a doormat? Are you putting this person's emotional needs ahead of your own health? Selfie 3. Start to build boundaries for this relationship. Does your friend invite themselves over at all hours of the night? Are they constantly bossing you around? Are they always borrowing money from you? All right. Once you know the boundary that you want to set, stick to it. Draw your line in the sand. Selfie 4. Recognize you can't change other people, but you can stop being a doormat. If you've determined that a friendship or relationship is toxic, you know that you have to change the nature of that relationship. Start by spending less time with that person and do your best to detach yourself emotionally. Hopefully, setting boundaries will help you begin to phase this relationship out. Selfie 5. Get a second opinion. Especially if you're emotionally vulnerable, the best thing you can do is surround yourself with people who love you and who want you to be happy and healthy. Use them as a lifeline during this time. Selfie 6. Above all else, look out for yourself. Studies have shown that people with low self-esteem are far more likely to find themselves in toxic relationships. You will never be treated with love and respect unless you absolutely believe that you deserve these things. Remember, you teach people how to treat you. So do yourself the favor of loving yourself. That's the first step to any relationship. To recap, if you have diagnosed yourself as being in a toxic relationship, the first step is recognizing this. Then, recognizing your role in the relationship. Once you do this, you can start to set boundaries for this relationship and change the way you interact with this person. To help, surround yourself with people who love you, and above all else, look out for yourself. Well, that's all from me today, Wellcasters. Would you do me a kindness? Subscribe to our channel.
Okay, hopefully that video gave you some insight, maybe gave you an opportunity to reflect on the relationships in your lives, and perhaps you may think this and take some different steps if you are involved in a toxic relationship. Next, let's focus on expecting respect. Before starting a relationship, ask yourself, what is important to me? How do I like to be treated? How do I communicate? How do I prefer for people to communicate to me? What behaviors make me feel disrespected? It's important for you to think these through before you get into a relationship so that nobody else is defining that for you. You come in with a clear idea of what your expectations are so that you can communicate that clearly to the other person in the relationship. And then you can start off on a good foot where everyone is clear on how you would like to be treated. Remember the last point of that last video. You teach people how to treat you. This is just a brief little poem that was written, and it just seems to really fit well with the idea of being in healthy relationships. It basically says, a good partner cares about your happiness, trusts you and believes you, supports your interests, respects your privacy and boundaries, understands you have a life outside of the relationship. A good partner values what you have to say, does not pressure you, never punishes, threatens, or hurts you. A good partner wants you to be who you are. And if you use this as a mantra as to what you are seeking in a good partner and in a good friendship, then this is a great way to establish boundaries and a tone for your relationships. Communication. So I bet many of you can think back to where situations have gone wrong with a friend or a significant other, and you realize it all boiled down to poor communication. Somebody misunderstood what you were saying, or perhaps you misunderstood what the person was saying. Communication is key in a relationship. There are different communication styles. There's passive communication, there's aggressive communicators, and there's assertive communication. What we all want to strive to is to being assertive in our communication. Passive communication is kind of disguised as being somebody who is not a disruptor, who is focused on being peacekeeping, and who is just kind of easygoing. Well, that's not always great in a relationship. That could just be somebody who's avoiding conflict. And that could be a problem because if you're a passive communicator, then a lot of your needs may not be met because you're not willing to deal with the discomfort of confrontation and dealing with a conflict with somebody else. And so it's really important to remember that while being a passive communicator may lead to peaceful relationships, but I bet if you think about it, if you're a passive communicator, sometimes you're not necessarily in a comfortable place and you're having to sacrifice more than you're willing to because you're choosing to be passive in your communication and keeping peace. And eventually what can happen is you can build resentment towards the other person because you start thinking or thinking that the person should assume what you want or need. And that's not fair to the other person ultimately. Then you have aggressive communicators. Those are the people who don't hold back. They have strong opinions and they don't mind arguing. Sometimes that can lead to being overly argumentative and not being strategic or wise about what battles should you pick. And so it's really important to think about your tone and how frequently you are confronting people. If you're somebody who's frequently in conflict with people, constantly having to address situations, maybe perhaps you can see if and reflect on, am I an aggressive communicator? And then finally, another communication style that I talked about is what we all strive to is assertive communication. And so it's a balance of not being somebody who's constantly going into arguments and confrontation, but also not being somebody who just stays quiet and and avoids conflict. An assertive communicator, they communicate directly, but not at the expense of others. You can be straightforward and honest in a constructive way. You can be thoughtful in how you communicate with that person, and you ensure that your needs are being met as well. All right, so there are 3 steps to communicating assertively. Step 1, use I feel statements. When you do this, you're really owning what's going on and you're not putting it on somebody else. I don't know if you've noticed it, but sometimes you're you're not necessarily having an argument, but maybe you're confronting somebody about something and you start off with you. Well, that immediately puts that person on the defensive because what you're selling them right off the bat is that they're the reason why there's something going on. And you're not owning how you feel about the situation and why it's an issue. And so it's important to show ownership from the beginning so that somebody's walls doesn't come up and they're not automatically on the defensive, which keeps them from really listening to what you really want to say. So make sure you start with I feel. So for example, you might tell somebody who's late all the time picking you up for an outing to say, I feel like you don't, I feel disrespected when you don't pick me up on time. Then they can address, then what you've done is you made them aware of how it makes you feel, and that connects them with their feelings, and then they realize, okay, maybe this is an action that I can change, as opposed to saying, you are so rude to not pick me up on time. Now that person is connecting to the fact that you've called them rude, as opposed to the actual behavior and the action, which is that they're late picking you up all the time. So tell the person how you're feeling at the moment and try to be honest and accurately describe your feelings about the situation. Step 2, I want or need. Say what you want or need. Oftentimes, for especially passive communicators, sometimes aggressive communicators, all of us do this. We make assumptions about what we think people should know about what we want or need based on how we treat other people. There may be some things you think, oh, I would never do this to somebody. Let's say, for example, picking up late. I wouldn't constantly pick up somebody late because I think that would be disrespectful of their time. I think that that would be wasting their time. And so when you're friends or in a relationship with somebody who's constantly late getting you, then you think, well, you don't address it and you just think, well, you should know better. I would never do that to you. You should already know that. Well, don't make assumptions about what somebody should know or shouldn't know. We all come from different backgrounds with different personalities, and at least in the beginning, give people the benefit of the doubt and educate them on what you want. And finally, step 3, tell the person what you're prepared to do to get your needs met or resolve the problem. That way, you're showing that you're in active participation in moving past whatever the conflict is in the relationship. So, for example, with the person who's always late picking you up, if you say, I feel disrespected when you pick me up late all the time. What I need for you to do is to really let me know if you're running late or to make it a point to be on time when you're picking me up. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to text you when I'm getting ready to let you know when you should be on your way. Or you can say, I'm going to text you when I'm 10 minutes out for waiting for you. That way you're showing that you're actively supporting this person in helping meet your needs. So here's what I'd like you to do now. You're going to stop this podcast for a minute, and I want you to discuss this in small groups. First question, what problems could you see for a passive communicator? How might they feel? How might they appear to others? Secondly, what problems could you see for an aggressive communicator? How might they appear to others? So discuss that in small groups and maybe put together a short list of problems for passive communicators and problems that aggressive communicators experience, and then present that to the class. Have one person per group present that to the class. So at this point, press pause so that you can do this discussion. Okay, I hope that that discussion was helpful to you and you were able to kind of look at a comprehensive list of the problems that can occur for passive communicators versus aggressive communicators. So now, what I'd like to see you do is role play assertive communication. So basically, you look at these scenarios and you're back in your small groups, role play what would be an appropriate assertive way to communicate. Scenario 1, your girl or boyfriend is late picking you up for school, even though you told him or her you had to make up a test in the morning. So in your group, discuss what would be some statements you could make that would be assertive communication. Scenario 2, your girl boyfriend asked to copy part of your paper, but you don't feel comfortable sharing your work. In scenario 3, you decide the relationship is not working out for you and you want to break up. So you're going to work on all 3 of these scenarios in your small group and come up with some statements on what you would do. So at this point, press pause and continue with this activity. Oh, I hope that these are statements that you came up with that are going to help you down the line when if you're ever in any of those situations. And perhaps you can just kind of keep that in your toolbox if you ever encounter that or if you're having to give advice to a friend regarding any of these scenarios. And now, after looking at the video and having discussions, upon reflection, what is one thing you learned about being in a healthy relationship? And what is one thing you learned about communication? Briefly share that in your small group, or actually briefly share that in a large group and share that with your teacher. One thing you've learned about healthy relationships and communication. Well, that concludes this lesson on healthy relationships. I hope that you found that to be useful and that you're able to take this with you in your relationships.